The origin of life, an age-old debate. Men have always been curious about origins. The most recent form of this debate takes on evolution versus creation. Evolution, a relatively new theory to come on the scene with Darwin and his book, The Origin of Species. But why is man so curious about origin? Maybe because the past is the key to the future. After all, how can you know where you're headed if you don't know where you've come from? A people without a past are easily fooled.
Welcome everyone. If you guys could grab your seats, that'd be great. It's truly awesome to see such a large number of people out here for this creation evolution debate. I'd like to just quickly welcome the moderator who's graciously come in to moderate the event tonight, Dr. James Connolly. He got his doctorate of philosophy from York University in 2008, so I'd just like to welcome him up.
All right, well, good evening and welcome to our creationism versus evolution debate. My name is James Connolly, and I'll be the debate moderator this evening. As Mike mentioned, I'm a philosophy professor at Trent University, and in that capacity, I've been teaching introductory, symbolic, and informal logic courses here on the UOIT campus since 2006. So before we get started, I'll briefly introduce our debate participants and provide a general outline of how the debate will proceed. So as you can see, each team has 3 individuals. On my left, the side representing creationism is the campus church team. And the campus church team consists of Raquel Murray, okay, who's studying modeling and computational science for her master's in science, and she also has a bachelor in science, a bachelor of science in physics, with a math minor at UOIT. We have Nathan Nadeau. He's studying kinesiology for his Bachelor of Health Sciences here at UOIT, and he's an executive member of Campus Church. Okay, and we have finally Kevin Gabriel studying life sciences for his Bachelor of Science, and he's also an executive member for Campus Church. Okay, and our evolutionist team. So let's give it up. All right. So we have Roman Choden, okay, studying life sciences for his Bachelor of Science. He's the here at UIT, and he's the president and founding member of the Skeptics Symposium. Keegan Gwydolin, okay, is our second member of the team. He's also studying life sciences for his Bachelor of Science here at UOIT, and he's the vice president and founding member of the Skeptics Symposium. And finally, we have Mackie Drew. He's studying computer sciences for his Bachelor of Science here at UIT. And he's vice president and founding member of the Skeptics Symposium. Okay, so just briefly, the debate is going to take place in several stages or cycles. First, each team is going to make an opening statement. The evolutionists will make their opening statement first, followed by the creationists. Each team will have 5 minutes to make their opening statement. Second, the evolutionists will then proceed to give 2 distinct arguments in favor of their position. In each case, they're going to have 10 minutes to present their argument, after which time the creationists will have 5 minutes for a rebuttal to that argument. The evolutionists will then have 5 minutes to respond. After each round of argument, So there's 2 arguments. After each round of argument, the floor will be opened up to questions for 5 minutes, and what I'll do is I'll just get you to raise your hand, and if I pick you to ask a question, you can come up to the microphone at the front. So after the evolutionists present 2 arguments, the creationists are then going to have their opportunity to offer 2 distinct arguments of their own. As in the case of the evolutionists, they'll have 10 minutes to present their argument, after which the evolutionists will have 5 minutes for a rebuttal, and the creationists will have 5 minutes for a response to the rebuttal, and then there will be 5 minutes for questions. So after 4 rounds of arguments, 2 for each team, the floor will then be opened up for 5 final minutes worth of questions, after which each team will make a 5-minute closing statement, and the closing statements will bring an end to this evening's debate. So just before we get started, though, with this evening's debate, I was asked to conduct an informal poll. So we're going to try and see by show of hands how many people in the audience are either favor evolution, creation, or are undecided. So let's start with evolution. Who favors evolution? Okay, a few people. All right, how many people favor creationism? Okay, wow. Some people are doubling up over here. Some people are doubling up. In any case, so undecided. Anyone undecided? A few? All right, well, let's get started. So we'll have opening statements from the evolutionist team to start. Oh, okay. So you want to switch back and forth? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Roman just mentioned to me, instead of 2 arguments in a row, we're going to alternate. So the evolutionist team will present an argument, then the creationist team, the evolutionist, and then the creationist. Otherwise, the format is the same.
Awesome. Hello? All right. So from our point of view, there are 2 types of people in this world: those who accept evolution and those who do not yet understand it. To say that this debate is a creation versus evolution debate is almost dishonest, as evolution only explains the origin of species once life has begun. So we must include abiogenesis, the origin of living matter from non-living matter. So it would be more correct to say that this debate is between the origin of life and modern species through natural means versus supernatural means. We, and the vast majority of scientists, through the examination of the natural world, have come to the conclusion that the universe we live in, along with all of its inhabitants, can have arose without the necessity for some grand creator. It is much more likely that life arose from non-living matter than from an immaterial mind of Yahweh as an afterthought. The theory of evolution is supported by virtually every field of science that exists, including geology, paleontology, biochemistry, and much more. When modern genetics came around, it sought to examine the claims of evolution only to support it heavily. If a tree was drawn up by genetic analysis and is superimposed onto a tree that would represent what Charles Darwin had proposed based off of behavioral and morphological analysis, they would be very similar. This is a hallmark of good science: verification, test and retest. Let me take a minute to explain what a scientific theory really is. A scientific theory is only conceived once you've acquired enough facts to create a trend. This trend is then analyzed, and the mechanism is then attempted to be explained with a theory. Most people are hung up on theory versus fact when they do not understand the difference. Theories are much more important than facts, because a fact in itself is just a truth and in itself is meaningless. A theory is much more useful as it provides the mechanism and allows for predictions of future events. It is the fact that something will fall to the ground 100 times out of 100 times. A theory is then developed based off these facts, in this case, the theory of gravitation. All supernatural claims are not science, and most begin with a theory and attempt to accumulate facts. This should sound familiar because creationism is such a claim. If asked why a creationist thinks the way they think, they'll say simply because they read it in the Bible. Once they have acquired their scientific theory, they will attempt to find facts that kind of sort of support their claim or stretch scientific truth while discounting unsupportive evidence. No supernatural claims can be tested and could therefore be anything, because anything is possible in a delusion. The supernatural belief in creationism is much like saying that gravity is not what attracts masses. It's those blue broccoli elastics that you see at grocery stores that are infinitely undetectable by any means ever. They are just as testable and just as likely to be true. Another part of a theory, as mentioned before, is its application to fit all data to predict events. Evolution can distinguish itself further from creationism by making predictions. Creationists cannot claim to have a predictive element. Another aspect of evolution is that it's many orders of magnitude simpler than creationism. The concept that Yahweh, a being of great impossibility, except in the context of religion, has created everything that we see today, as well as placing all the animals in their particular habitats, and providing them with useless vestigial traits and suboptimal adaptations, which would later confuse most of mankind as to what really happened. Evolution provides an elegant explanation as to the origin of modern species of animals. Evolution shows that more adapted organisms can arise from less adapted organisms due to selective pressures from the environment. This is commonly in the form of increasing complexity. Every day, evolution becomes more and more apparent, and as the evidence stacks up, it seems to completely overshadow and negate creationist claims. They must concede to all things we have proven directly. The theory of evolution has been proven in a controlled laboratory setting with very strong confidence. These experiments were done on bacteria, so therefore creationists say, aha, but those are only single-celled organisms. So creationists make up terms like micro and macroevolution in their own context. Micro referring to evolution as applied to single-celled organisms, and macro referring to the evolution of more complex organisms such as mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. Let's be clear right now. There is no difference, and nor is there a reason for these to be different. As I've explained, scientific theories are universal in all areas that they apply. Evolution applying to the formation of more complex and better adapted organisms for the environment that they find themselves in. After this debate, I hope that you will accept evolution if you do not already, and if you already do, then I hope that you've learned something. One thing that will become quite apparent will be the blatancy of evolution, as well as the stories of creation fading into bedtime mythology. All 12 pages of our references, which is around 240, will be posted on our website. Thank you.
So now we'll have an opening statement from our creationist team.
Good evening. I'd like to begin with a quote from the late evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould. He says, "Our ways of learning about the world are strongly influenced by the biased modes of thinking that each scientist must apply to any problem. The stereotype of a fully rational and objective scientific method, with individual scientists as logical robots, is self-serving mythology. Ladies and gentlemen, the 6 of us standing before you tonight have spent hours examining the same data, same arguments, and same rebuttals. Yet we have come to completely separate and opposite conclusions. The explanation of how this can happen stems from this mythology of a fully rational and objective scientist, as Dr. Gould explained. Richard Lewontin, American evolutionary biologist, stated, "It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but, on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive. Moreover, that materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Lewontin argues that restricting science to material causes is an a priori assumption, a Latin phrase which means based on hypothesis rather than experiment. A belief in science as the ultimate source of truth is defined by an underlying presumptive assumption that anything supernatural cannot be and therefore is not part of science. An a priori adherence to the tenets of materialism rejects the possibility of anything supernatural being a credible alternative. Methodological materialists have forced their pursuit of truth to exclude God as a possibility and therefore limited this pursuit even to the extent of the counterintuitive. The obvious question that arises is whether the same can be said of myself and the other representatives standing on the side of creation, and the answer is a definite yes. We are approaching this debate and the rest of our lives with the conviction that a sovereign, holy, all-powerful God of the Bible exists and has both physically and literally created the universe in 6 days. As a result, our view of science is affected by our beliefs. The point is that, put simply, everyone who has ever lived approaches life through the lens of their worldview. their personal set of convictions and beliefs about reality. Whatever shape that worldview takes, everything is seen through these a priori assumptions, and therefore everything is tainted by them. The simple fact explains the seemingly confusing realization that two groups of scientists can look at the exact same evidence and come to such different conclusions. The evidence does not change. Our interpretation of it does. The next question that logically arises then is, if we are looking at the exact same evidence as our skeptic friends, can we look at this evidence and point to the results of one single creator God? Well, if this world and universe is a creative act of God, we would expect to find morphological, anatomical, physiological, molecular, and behavioral similarities between organisms because they come from one intelligent creator. As described in the Bible, God created species according to their kinds, genetically robust yet distinct organisms that through the process of adaptation and the subsequent loss of genetic information would be able to radiate and become specialized for their individual niches. Organisms which could be traced back to the same kind then would be assumed to be more similar. As well, common traits such as conserved molecular domains and developmental processes would be expected to be similar due to their origin from a common creator. To use a simple analogy, Pablo Picasso's paintings are all characteristically similar of his style, yet each is also unique in its own way. Similarly, organisms all coming from the same creator would be expected to be similar in style, yet individually unique. Therefore, instead of standing opposed to comparative molecular, phylogenetic, and taxonomic data that has been collected by evolutionary biology, we interpret the same data to support the above expectation, namely the existence of the creator God. Ladies and gentlemen, science is inherently limited to the material universe and has no way of explaining or defining anything outside of the natural realm. Therefore, when we talk about the origin of life, we cannot offer scientific evidence for the actual act of ex nihilo creation, because this is a strictly supernatural act of God, but neither can there be any scientific evidence against this fact for the same reason. However, what we can do is show scientifically how this act would logically result in everything that we see today. A fully rational scientific method is impossible due to the unavoidable a priori assumptions of every scientist. As Ralph Waldo Emerson so aptly stated, people only see what they are prepared to see. Tonight, our goal has nothing to do with winners and losers. Our hope and prayer is that each one of you will take a step back and look critically at the evidence that is being presented on both sides. Thank you.
All right, so now we'll have our first argument presented on the evolutionist side.
All right, so first I'd like to say I would love to prove God right. I would love to prove it true, but I can't. And I'm going to give you evidence. I'm here to convince you that abiogenesis is the only real way to view the creation of the first organism. It's scientific and rational, supported by evidence, and we've viewed all parts of it in the lab. I'd like to say that first that we have far too rigid standards of what's life and what's not life. We have on one side rocks, crystals, things of that nature, and on the other side we have cats and dogs and people. But in between you have things like viruses, where they aren't totally considered life, and you can see that by the split of scientists who think they aren't and who think they are. I think it's important not to focus right now on the evidence for abiogenesis, but more the process. I do have at least 3 peer-reviewed studies for each point I'm bringing up tonight. I can give it to you later if you'd like, but it's more important right now to give you the idea that it's totally possible and probable that life was created by totally scientific means, totally natural means. We haven't done a complete transformation from non-life to life in the lab yet, but we have done each step individually. So we could do it, in theory, if we have had it set up right. We found from studies showing that we have the conditions of Earth and whatnot in early life that it's almost inevitable for it to be true. The problem is we have a few theories, a few discrepancies in the very specifics of how abiogenesis works, like where it happened and whatnot. But all of the theories are very much the same. It's not a matter of picking which one is perfectly, which one works. We have plenty that work. It's the one that actually happened is the problem. And there are often some misconceptions. Early life would not have been nearly as complex as the simplest life today. It would have been much simpler, and it would have caused more life coming from that would have taken over the old life. It would have been taking up the same niche and would have taken over it. There would be no complex protein machinery. There would be no complex fatty acids around the cell wall, just basics of reproduction and information storage. Also, what I'm talking about does not affect evolution at all. Even if abiogenesis is totally improvable, which it isn't, then you can, it does not affect evolution. It's sort of like saying that evolution as a theory is like saying an umbrella doesn't predict hurricanes, so it doesn't work. You need to understand abiogenesis is not a matter of likelihood. We know that it could happen given enough time, and it's not a special property, just an emergent property of proper circumstances. All right, so first you're going to have to grant me that we have simple chemicals in the beginning of the prebiotic Earth. We know that this is true. I can give you evidence, but again, you can see the references. We're going to assume right now that methane, ammonia, water, hydrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide and phosphite were there in huge abundance. And arguing against this is pretty much like arguing against gravity. It's true. So the first step in moving from non-life to life is the production of monomers, which can happen from things like UV rays, radioactivity, the sun, hydrothermal vents, or electricity. And they've been shown to be produced in huge quantities, even in the harmful UV rays and huge oxygen quantity environments. It makes fatty acids, which would be the cell membrane, and nucleotides, which would be the information, and the acting proteins in the mix. These nucleotides like to form together to make DNA, but they often have a hard time getting together, so you need some sort of catalyst to make them work together. That would be a clay crystal. Clay is extremely abundant. These monomers would come together on the clay crystals, and it's been shown that this happens, and you come up with complex polymers once they get close enough together. Every now and then you get a special kind of polymer. It's called a ribozyme. It actually works as the blueprints and the builder for it. It's a molecule that reproduces itself. It catalyzes its own reaction. It's extremely interesting. Modern nucleotides are too stable to work, so it wouldn't be something like DNA or RNA, but it would be more like RNA, a single strand of information, or I suppose random structure of nucleotides. Recent experiments have shown that that these spontaneously form. They can change existing code. They can create new code just from these ribozymes. And that's essentially, for me, I think it's life. It's reproducing, it's changing, it's evolving, but I'm guaranteed none of you agree with that. So the problem here is we don't have any membrane. We don't have anything to contain it, to protect it, to help it grow. But we can see that even in these harsh conditions, boiling temperatures, ridiculous amounts of pH level in either direction, they form basic lipids that formed in hydrothermal vents can form very nice membranes that can collect nucleic acids. It's the free-floating amino acids are also, or the free-floating fatty acids are incorporated into it, causing it to grow, the membranes to grow. These nucleotides stay within it, and they can reproduce. They can, and when these cells grow large enough, they actually will be mechanically split. They create tube-like structures, and they divide. So we have a verified cell membrane that can grow, divide, extremely similar to our own, and it can shown over millions of years to evolve into ours, into our complex, much more complex cell membranes that we have today. So we have a self-sustained membrane containing self-reproducing genetic code that can grow, divide, and adapt all on their own. So when does it become life? What are we missing? It's eating. It doesn't eat. So this is where it gets really cool. Lipid membranes with more genetic information, you could see that as an adaptation at that point, will actually increase the pressure of the membrane, and it will incorporate any other cells it interacts with. It'll form into one, make a much larger, better cell that's essentially eaten. Membranes that contain polymers that reproduce faster and are more efficient, more accurate, will divide faster and eventually dominate the population. Early genomes were completely random and therefore contained no information. It was a symptom of their very structure that allowed them to replicate, grow, divide, and change. And then evolution happens. I'll be done before that. That's all. Very basic systems that have been proven to form in basic early Earth that can eat, grow, contain genetic information, replicate, evolve through simple thermodynamic, mechanical, and electrical forces. No magic, no Yahweh, no incredible probability, no lightning striking a mud puddle, just simple proven chemistry. Thank you for listening.
All right, so now we'll have a 5-minute rebuttal from the creationists.
All right, thank you, Mackie. So, what is abiogenesis? You've just heard from the skeptics that that it is a process from which life arose naturally. And like we noted at the beginning, that the origin of life is not encompassed within the theory of evolution, so I won't repeat that, which is fine. But I have a couple questions about this natural process. Where and how did the complex genetic instruction set programmed into DNA come into existence? In fields of molecular science, cell biology, cybernetics, there's an understanding that nucleotides come together and form a strand of RNA, or pre-RNA, but there must be genetic instruction encoded into those nucleotides like ink on paper. The page alone is meaningless without the information. A natural process in question must have generated the following aspects of life: a genetic operating system with which to record programming instructions, a software itself for the production or assembly of every individual building block, and a coding system which will translate the triplet codon language into polyamino acid. So the issue here is that the natural processes have never been observed to write conceptual instructions. We must ask, how did the inanimate nature write these instructions to organize metabolism, write an operating system that will symbolically represent, record, and replicate those instructions, and how did it write the bijective coding scheme? We could even add a fourth question: how did inanimate nature design and engineer a cell capable of implementing these coded instructions? So, the skeptics have made a claim that given sufficient time, genetic instruction could have arisen. A large amount of time does not provide an explanatory mechanism for spontaneously generated genetic information. What is needed is a plausible mechanism for natural process generation of functional algorithms. We need empirical evidence of prescriptive genetic information arising spontaneously without artificial investigator selection, for example, Celix. Also note that polymers also have the tendency to break down thermodynamically over time. Also, the claim that genetic information arose because of necessity, meaning like there is some type of natural mechanism that we're overlooking that we're going to get to at some point. The evolutionary instinct is that there must be some natural mechanism that we're overlooking which will explain the origin of genetic instruction. The claim that the genetic instruction arose because of necessity is incorrect. Natural mechanisms are all highly self-ordering. Massive amounts of data can be compressed to very simple algorithms in the laws of physics and chemistry, for example, F is equal to ma. However, no natural mechanism reducible to law can explain the high information content of genomes. This is a mathematical truism, not a matter to be overturned by future empirical data. The claim that the genetic information could have possibly come from chance, even if the primary structures mysteriously emerged at the same time, even if a random long sequence of DNA emerged and had the same sequences of genetic information, a cell is not a bag of enzymes. Without the machinery and protein workers, the message cannot be received and understood. And without the genetic instruction, the machinery cannot be assembled. And so Mackie was talking about the RNA world. The one thing that the RNA world conveniently bypasses is the translative coding issues. Retroviruses may have allowed RNA to become DNA at some point, and the DNA could take over as a more stable genetic instruction set, but retroviruses depend on reverse transcriptase, and this complex protein enzyme, like Mackie said, is not available in the RNA world. Also note that this conversion from RNA to DNA still does not explain the origin of the initial RNA genetic programming. Dr. Trevors notes that the instruction set needs protein synthesis to replicate the instruction set and regulate cell division. As for the current research that's going on, all in vitro ribosomic editing requires extensive artificial selection by humans like Celix. Here, the nucleotide sequence is deliberately manipulated and basically coaxed through many iterations to achieve the experimentalist goal. Sorry, I just don't want to take up too much time. Thank you. I'll just end with this. Dr. David Abel states this: neither chance nor necessity has ever been observed to program computational success, optimize algorithms, or organize physical entities into holistic, conceptual, pragmatic schemes. Yet we continue to believe blindly in the mystical capabilities of spontaneous mass energy interactions. The constraints did it, we proclaim. We believe this nonsense because we have no choice given our a priori commitments to naturalism. We are forced to, by this philosophical imperative to believe that undirected physicality could self-organize into the most exquisite organization and utility known to science, rather than reconsider the possibility of a long-standing Kuhnian paradigm rut, which we choose to hunker down in the obstinate fanatical physicalism. Don't trouble me with the evidence, my mind is made up. Undirected physicodynamics did it. Abel's honesty reminds me far too much of Proverbs 11:2, and I believe this applies to all of us as humans. It says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Thank you.
All right, so now we'll have a 5-minute response from the evolutionists.
All right, first I'd like to say I addressed most of those things in my argument. I mean, I don't know. It's like it was a script or something. Anyway, it was a priori, for one, the fact that you assume that just because it's now means that it was always. I explained how these genetic codes can come from just natural thermodynamic processes. I mean, I don't know how I could make it any clearer. It was, it was explained. Thermodynamics, the initial genome is random, and then things that do better are selected, and it gives you the illusion of design, when really it's just a combination of random chemicals that are not pulling their code or their instructions from any sort of creator. They're just their structure. It's like a water pipe. The water pipe is shaped like an L. The water's going to go around the L. It has nothing to do with intelligence. We have chemical evolution from the basic nucleotides to the RNA and things beyond. And not necessarily RNA. You often have, in the prebiotic world, you can often have things that use different nucleotides we don't even see today because they were less common and it was evolved out. There's no necessity for genetic information. It's just an emergent property, something that happened because it could. It's like a rock being eroded. It's just happening because it can. It's not like there's any need for life. There's no need for any intelligence. It's just something that happened. I don't see any reason to superimpose meaning on this. You're equivocating information, for one. It's not information, it's just the structure. It's like saying this scene right here is information. If I take a picture, it's information, but it's not information. It's just the scene. It's just the structure of what is here. It's not information. I'm sorry, I can't say that enough. We have great examples. We've observed this happening many, many times. I have 240 studies at least, and those are just the ones I found. We have enzymes that can be flawlessly incorporated into the RNA world. You can build these ribozymes that I was talking about. You can build secondary structures that like enzymes, and those can help with encoding. They can go collect like amino acids that they need to build proteins and whatnot. You can see, I cut this right out of my, I shouldn't have. There's a really small level enzyme incorporation that you can have right after the ribozyme. And it explains the transition from RNA to DNA. We can see that the DNA was built as a secondary structure initially as a more hard-coded version. And it eventually, took over. It's transition. It's just because of the evolution. And we have, what was that quote? We've never had randomness and come up with anything smart or improve algorithms. We've come up with walking robots based on just random natural selection. It was simulated in a computer. We have great, like, things we could never even come up with. And it's right there. We have tons of programs that do that. I'm flabbergasted. All of the things that were said there are wrong. It was undeniably false. And it was either ignorance or lying, I'm sorry.
All right, so now we'll open it up to the floor for questions for about 5 minutes. So if you do have a question, maybe raise your hand. Yeah, Stephanie?
I know.
Sorry, what is it? Okay.
Am I supposed to use the mic?
Yeah, use the microphone.
Okay. Hello. I have a question for the creation side. I liked how when you were talking about abiogenesis, you mentioned that no scientist has ever really seen that process. But I liked how then Mackie came back with his point that he had, correct me, 240 studies demonstrating, I'm guessing, small parts of each process?
Approximately 204 for abiogenesis, the other
Okay.
3 were for evolution.
So that's an entirely scientific principle, which is really great that I think you're applying the methods of science to abiogenesis. But has anyone ever seen creation?
So when you are saying has anyone seen creation, are you talking about the actual physical act of ex nihilo creation?
Well, I think it's only fair that if you're going to demand that we've seen abiogenesis for it to be provable, you do the same with your own premise, right?
Okay, so what we're saying, and I set this up in my intro, is that ex nihilo creation itself is supernatural. It is outside the realm of science. It cannot be proven or disproven. But what we can do, and what we'll attempt to do for the rest of the night, is to show what we would expect seeing, what we would follow, what we would see following, based on that ex nihilo creation. What would we see in science if that happened? But no, we cannot give you scientific proof for the actual physical act because it's not a physical act, it's a supernatural act. We will just give you evidence for the following, what came after that. Why is it scientifically logical to believe in it?
So, correct me if I'm crazy. So, you both have texts which say that a certain premise is correct, right? So you're just saying if what happens afterwards is logical and follows, then that proves the original text correct.
I'm saying that a supernatural event cannot be proven or disproven by science. So that actual event is outside the realm of science. But we can show you what would logically follow from that.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, do we have another question out there maybe for the evolutionists? Yeah, go ahead, sir, if you want to come up and ask.
Folks, I appreciate all what you're doing here. As an ex-monotheistic evolutionist, I used to side with yourselves. One of the issues that came to me where I struggled was when you deal with self-awareness and man's ability to be aware that we are aware. And how can one evolve into that? And how can one evolve into the knowledge of right or wrong? We can watch animals be born and put off to the side by the mother bearing the child, or bearing the kitten or whatever to die because they don't understand right or wrong and there's no repercussion. And I'm not sure how I could fit that in. And in fact, over the years, as I've studied it more and more, I've swayed further and further and further to that side, citing even things like the eye. We talked about receptors, we talked about things that can analyze and process, and yet with something as simple as an eye, then how would you say that it evolved with the brain to process, with an eye to give the information? How do you simultaneously have that happen and not until it happened have all the energy that that organism was using, put it at a disadvantage to the other organisms that are vying for food or for whatever element, until both those items were working simultaneously together? Thank you.
All right, well, I figure I'll take the consciousness one because I know quite a bit about it. But Keegan, do you want to take the I one? Or? Yeah. All right, okay. So the consciousness thing is, there's actually some studies going on right now about the levels of consciousness, about how it's observed. We can see in rats, they can identify a reflection of themselves. That's a stage 2 consciousness. It's where you can observe yourself. We have what we call stage 6 consciousness. It's a matter of us being able to see ourselves, or see somebody else, seeing us, see them. It goes back and forth like that. It's the idea that we can observe something else. The idea of self-awareness is simply us observing ourselves and knowing we're there. It's observed. The several stages are observed in different animals that you might consider more intelligent. Sorry, it wasn't really topical to the abiogenesis, though.
Well, we have to be kind of quick. We only have about a minute left.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Keegan, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that I will cover in the evolution portion of our argument, I will answer the second question you posed. So you can move along.
Move along? Yeah. Okay, so the second part of the question will be addressed later on. For now, we're going to move on to our first argument from the creationist side.
As a third-year biological science major, I cannot tell you how many times I have had the scientific method taught and explained to me. The method is universal, timeless, and incredibly valuable in its ability to determine causes and effects in the natural world. Simply stated, if you want to explain an effect by the historical scientific method, it therefore means explaining it by reference to a cause that is known to produce the effect in question. In other words, the scientific method explores causes that are known to produce specific effects. Now, in this argument, we will attempt to apply the same scientific method to the question of the origin of biological life. The central question in the study of the origin of life is in regards to the origin of the information that makes life tick, so to speak. Any biology student would be quick to affirm that information literally runs the show in biology. Now, I understand that most of you probably are not biological science majors like myself, so I believe a quick explanation of what we mean by biological information will be helpful to the delivery of our argument. As most of you, I'm sure, know, the main memory bank or storehouse of information in the cell is DNA. The massive molecule contains the majority of the genetic material that is used to control literally every part of the functioning process known as life. DNA codes this information using 4 nitrogenous bases: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. The specific ordering of these bases is copied during the process of transcription to create specific mRNA strands, which in turn are processed with the specific sequences of their bases, giving direct rise to the order of amino acids that make up any given protein through the process of translation. This specific order of amino acids forms a highly specialized protein. Proteins, put simply, run the cell. They function as enzymes, receptors, transcription factors, etc. So this is a quick summary of what we mean when we are referring to biological information, that information which is encoded digitally by the sequence of bases in the DNA molecule, other parts of the genome, and beyond. Returning to what was being described earlier, remember that the scientific method seeks to explain an effect such as information by reference to a cause that is known to produce the effect in question. Therefore, in applying the scientific method to the question of the origin of life, we need to find a causal explanation for this biological information. If explaining the origin of life, one must explain all of its noticeable and important features, the most important of which undoubtedly is the presence of digital information. So the important question becomes, where does that information come from? How did this important feature of life arise? At this point in the argument, I would like to turn to Darwin and Lyell, believe it or not. Both gentlemen firmly advocated that we should explain the past by our knowledge of presently acting causes. Now remember, we are looking for a causal explanation for biological information, so using Darwin and Lyell's logic, our question becomes, what is the presently acting cause of digital code and information? Well, we all know the obvious answer to that question. By repeated and uniform experience, which, it is important to note, is the basis for all scientific reasoning about the past. We know that information always comes from an intelligent source. We know from experience that whenever we want to confer new functionality to something, for example, a computer, we must give it code. Therefore, using Darwin's logic, we can clearly see that if we want to explain the past by our knowledge of presently acting causes, we come to the conclusion that information always comes from an intelligent source. Therefore, it follows by deductive reasoning that the information necessary to build the first life must have come from an intelligent source, namely, from our point of view, the Creator God. Now, at this point, it's important to dig a little deeper into the concept of information. We must understand that biological information is found not in the physical makeup of DNA, but specifically in the precise order of the base pairs found in the DNA molecule and the subsequent order of bases in mRNA and amino acids in proteins. Dr. Werner Gitt attempts to fully characterize this concept of information by investigating 5 levels of information. The 5 aspects are statistics, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and apobetics. Information is represented, that is transmitted and stored as a language taking the form of ink on a page or bases in a DNA molecule. From a defined alphabet, the individual symbols are assembled into words, statistics, the first level of information. From these words, each word having been assigned a meaning, sentences are formed according to the firmly defined rules of grammar, syntax. These sentences are the bearers of semantic information. Furthermore, two final levels of information are required: the action intended, pragmatics, and the desired goal, apobetics. These both belong of necessity to the concept of information. Now, it is effortless to apply these 5 levels of information to the biological information found in the DNA molecule. Statistics, the first and bottom level of information, is the bridge between the material and the non-material world. This would be the actual physical presence of nitrogenous bases. Syntax encompasses the structural characteristics of the way information is represented. In the case of biological information, the rules of appropriate base pairing and bonding of bases to the backbone of DNA. Semantic information is that proper ordering of base pairs following the rules of syntax. Pragmatics is the action carried out, specifying a sequence. And apobetics is the desired goal, or the production of a specified protein. Why did I go into that much detail characterizing the concept of information? Merely to illustrate the fact that biological information is much more specified and complex than the simple presence of DNA nucleotides. It is instead an expression of the appropriate ordering of these nucleotides. Paul Davies, an anti-theistic evolutionist, explains, "We now know that the secret of life lies not with the chemical ingredients as such, but with the logical structure and organizational arrangement of the molecules. It is the software of the living cell that is the real mystery, not the hardware." Thus, as Davies himself asserts, information is absolutely immaterial. It is not encoded in the laws of physics, chemistry, or biology. But remember what we established earlier, that the most important question in regards to the origin of life is a causal explanation of the source of information, which to our knowledge has always arisen only through intentional, purposeful will. The question therefore necessarily confronts methodological materialists such as Davies and our friends the skeptics: where did this information come from? Davies frames the question this way: how did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. There is no known law of physics able to create information from nothing. In a materialistic world, one without any supernatural creator, there are only 2 possibilities: chance and determinism. Determinism is the idea that there is an inbuilt bias in nature to create life, but Davies himself points out that there is no evidence of such bias in the laws of nature. The other possibility is chance, which Davies also rejects because the odds against the chance formation of the complex organization of life are, in his words, breathtakingly huge. This forces Davies and other evolutionists to propose that there might be some sort of other theory, such as molecular Darwinianism as a possible mechanism, the idea that natural selection could occur at the molecular level. This, however, is known to be incorrect because natural selection only works on living, self-reproducing systems. Therefore, evolutionary biologists are left without a mechanism other than design to explain this need for information. But of course, this is viewed by most as unscientific. As Frank Harold, a prominent evolutionary biochemist, states, we should reject as a matter of principle the substitution of intelligent design for the dialogue of chance and necessity. But we must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical system, only a variety of wishful speculations. Therefore, it has been clearly demonstrated that the source of biological information as the most important question in the origin of life research can only be from a pre-existing source of intelligence. Using Darwin and Lyell's theory that the past can be explained by presently acting causes, we determined that the causal explanation of information is an intelligent source. Information as a non-material entity cannot be created by a physical process, and therefore the presence of massive amounts of information present in the DNA of even the simplest of organisms begs for an intelligent creator at the origin of life. Interestingly enough, a modern version of the design argument involves detecting high information content that is found in DNA, or such as is found in DNA. In fact, this is exactly what the SETI project is all about, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. This program involves trying to detect a high information radio signal from outer space, which would be regarded as proof of an intelligent message sender. What better proof is there of our understanding of the need for intelligence to be behind any information-containing system? Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll have 5 minutes for rebuttal from the evolutionist side.
All right. So I'd just like to point out that everything that that Kevin has said does not support creationism at all. He has given you a fully deist argument without actually naming Yahweh as the source of everything. He's just said that it's possible that an intelligent creator could have been Odin, could have been Zeus, could have been anyone. There's no reason, he didn't give any evidence why it would have been from the Bible. He didn't mention any of the 7 days. He didn't mention anything else. It's pure conjecture to assume that God did it. Yahweh did it. As far as the origin of genetic information and all that kind of stuff, Mackie has already said, so I'm not going to expand on it. Also, he draws a false analogy. He says that language and computer code have inherent properties of a creator. Have properties of a creator, although they don't have inherent properties of inherent chemical properties like nucleotides do. DNA has a chemical property that allows it to react with proteins, etc., but do not convey just information. They actually have a physical use. The confusion is much like a tribal, let's say, a tribal community looking at the moon and saying, that's information. Looking at the stars and saying, based off of the stars, I see that a volcano is going to explode or whatever. They see that as information, although all it is just the light from millions and millions of light years away stars. There's no correlation. And we also show that there is, in fact, a chemical evolution of chemicals. We have a paper, January this year, of natural selection on the chemical level between two stereoisomers, which have, a stereoisomer is a compound, two compounds that are exactly the same, except have a slightly different connectivity between each of the constituents from a center. I think that's it, because, I don't know, Mackie's argument had already pretty much refuted everything that Kevin said. Thank you.
All right, so now we'll have a 5-minute rebuttal from the creationist team. Response.
Okay, in reference to the deism, you had asked us to keep God in the Bible and using that as a source out of this, so that's what we're doing. We're respecting their position by keeping God out of this. However, in Nathan's argument, we will be addressing the 7-day creation of created kinds. So we will be addressing that. However, you kind of set up a straw man there, because you were saying, well, here, you said you didn't talk about God and therefore you're wrong. That's not the issue that's at stake right now. The issue is information, and you didn't address that. You didn't come back to that. My argument was that information is immaterial. There is nothing written into the laws of science that will produce correctly ordered DNA molecules, RNA molecules. That is not written into the laws of nature in any way. We talked about how chance and determinism are the two things that possibly evolutionists can use, how they are both wrong. And so I just can't help but notice that he did come up and didn't even reference what I talked about. He gave no explanation for how these things could have been ordered properly. He gave no explanation for how they could have, natural processes could have arranged these things in such a way as to produce this myriad of information that we see in the genome now. But it was just an attack of how I'm a deist, which I'm not. I'm a Bible-believing evangelical Christian. But I would just like to point out that my argument was not addressed in that rebuttal, and if you'd like to hear my argument again, I can send it to you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll open it up to the floor for 5 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Way in the back, can you come up to the front?
Yes, Kevin, the basic axiom of your argument was that information requires an intelligence to be created, correct? Yep. Okay. You specifically mentioned the SETI research looking for highly ordered radio signals. What does your statement have to say on the fact that highly ordered radio signals routinely come from all of the gas giant planets in the solar system, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all considered music by some? Music, again, another highly ordered construct that many people associate with mathematics and, again, culture and information, that are explained by simply naturalistic laws of black body radiation and gravitational fields and such.
So you're talking basically about the spectroscopy kind of analysis that we can have from these planets and whatever? That's your question?
Yeah, how can you claim one thing where there's direct evidence from something that you in fact mentioned against that? So that specific instance where that is the case.
Okay, well, just first off, my reference to SETI was just pointing out how dependent we are upon this notion that information comes from an intelligent source. Now, I would make a difference between information and just something like a repeated signal, because you're talking about how they have this ordered whatever. I mean, I don't know too much about this, but this ordered thing that could sound like music to some people or whatever. I think that is not the same as information, because information, what we're talking about right now, is highly ordered. Each individual nucleotide has to be the same. Okay, here, I just got something handed to me. Self-ordering events are physico-dynamic. They are constrained by environmental initial conditions and predicted by the laws of nature. There are no decision nodes steering toward algorithmic optimization. Cool. Okay. So you want to say something?
Well, I was just like when I think about information, there has to be a difference between ordering and organization. So self-organization requires purposeful selection from real options. It is fundamentally algorithmic, goal-oriented, and formal. Self-organization is only seen in the activities of living cognate agents, and that's what he's referring to. I think you might have said order a couple too many times, but that's what he's talking about. I hope that answers.
No.
Done?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question over in the far corner here. Can you come up? So I'm hoping it's a question for the evolutionists.
Sure is.
Okay, great.
Being born again, the Holy Spirit, filled with the Holy Spirit, born again. You must be born again. You never see the kingdom of heaven. Do you guys know your guys are named? You guys are in the Bible. Did you know that? Did you know your names were in the Bible? That God says in Psalm 14:1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So you guys are in the Bible.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's relevant to the argument at all.
Well, okay, then if I'm wrong, I got nothing to gain.
Well, we don't actually take the position that there is no God.
You guys are wrong. You got everything to lose.
Let's try one at a time.
Might I interject? We actually don't take the...
I'm not an educated man. You guys use words I've never heard of before. But I know I'm born of the Holy Spirit. I know where I came from and I know where I'm going.
We don't want to turn it into a shouting fest or a personal attack, so let's let one go at a time.
I'll just tell them their names are in the Bible.
Okay, that's great. So now let them respond.
Okay, well, we don't actually take the position that there is no God. We take the position that God has not been proven yet, and therefore we can't accept it. It's not a positive position that he doesn't exist. It's a negative position.
I'll be thinking it over.
All right. So unfortunately, that does it for our questions on this round. So we're going to move now on to our next round of the evolutionists presenting their second argument.
The cover of the November 2004 issue of National Geographic read, "Was Darwin wrong?" If you read the article, it's followed up by, "No, the evidence for evolution is overwhelming." Now, this makes my job of presenting the evidence for evolution in 10 short minutes rather difficult, but I will do my utmost. Evolution works through a process known as natural selection, wherein the organism with the more advantageous traits has a better chance of mating and therefore passing on these advantageous traits to the next generation. Evolution has been demonstrated conclusively in the lab and the natural world through adaptation of bacterial populations to the antibiotic drugs which assault them. I know antibiotic resistance is something that both the evolutionists and the creationists agree on. Is that correct? So, again, as Roman said in the introduction, there's no reason to believe that evolution on the micro scale, so-called, has any difference from the macro scale. It has also been demonstrated by the evolution of human cancer cells, which are now able to live outside the body independently. Evolution happens, and I'm going to try and show you why. The first thing we need for evolution to occur is genetic change. Genetic change is absolutely essential. Now, Kevin mentioned that there is, sort of alluded to, that there is no way to increase the amount of genetic information that you have. This is not true at all. We have what are known as genetic mutations. This is when the DNA itself changes. Mutations that increase the amount of genetic information in a cell include gene duplications, genome duplications, and chromosomal duplications. We also have many other mutations which change it in various other ways. Mutations are what produces the clay which natural selection molds to form new species by selecting for mutations which are beneficial in a given environment. Now, the first evidence we look for in evolution is in the past. Many anti-evolutionists claim that there exist no transitional fossils representing transitional forms which link the species we see today. However, these claims are unsubstantiated as endless transitional forms have been found which clearly illustrate the evolution of modern life. We also see what are known as vestiges, that is, structures or functions that were once useful, but which have since become obsolete or serve no purpose. For instance, the human appendix. We know that this is a vestigial remnant of the cecum, which is used in herbivores to help digest cellulose. This serves no purpose in humans, and we just have a little tiny, what they call vermiform appendix, which does absolutely nothing. You can take it out and you're absolutely fine. Additional morphological vestiges include the ostrich wing, which can no longer be used for flight, subepidermal eyes of cave salamanders, pelvic bones found in whales and snakes which have no legs. These all indicate evolutionary history of an organism. They are evidence for evolution because they show the structures which would have been important in the ancestral species and are retained due to this common ancestry. From the molecular standpoint, humans and primates lack the gene to synthesize vitamin C, unlike most other animals. So, evolution predicts that we'd find a broken gene, what we call a pseudogene, somewhere in the human genome that should be nearly identical to the vitamin C gene that we see in other animals. Well, we found it. It's exactly where we expected it to be, and it's non-functional, but it's almost identical to the vitamin C gene we find in other species. We also find evidence, molecular evidence. There's a major discrepancy in the genomes of apes and humans. Apes have 24 pairs of chromosomes and humans have 23. This would be a big problem for evolution. Fortunately, we found that 2 of these ape chromosomes underwent a head-to-head chromosomal fusion, which resulted in human chromosome 2. This is more molecular evidence of our evolutionary history and relation to apes. We also see developmental evidence. Structures develop in the embryo, which are then modified into different structures or degenerate entirely. For example, humans actually form gills in the womb. These are then modified to become our inner ear, eustachian tube, tonsils, parathyroid, and thymus. We also have our inner ear bones, which form from structures identical to those which form the reptilian jaw bones. We have fossil evidence that shows the jaw bones slowly progressing back and changing into the human ear bones. We also see snakes, legless lizards, whales, porpoises, and dolphins develop embryonic limbs which degenerate before their birth. These phenomena are only explicable from an evolutionary standpoint. We also have arguments from homology. These are Evolution predicts that animals with shared ancestry will possess homologous features, that is, similarity in structure despite difference in function. For example, we have the same bones in the same relative positions when we look at the bones in the human hand, the bird wing, bat wings, whale flippers, horse legs, webbed amphibian legs, and digging forelimbs. All of these serve different functions but use the same structure. Evolution also predicts that animals with both wings and hands should not exist, despite the fact that these structures would be useful to the organism. We don't see any animals with both wings and arms, both wings and hands. We see molecular homology evidence. Evolution predicts this homology in molecular features as well. You've heard that over 99% of our genome is shared with apes. That's a molecular homology. We see that we share this DNA because most genes are a result of duplication and minor modification of previously existing genes found in the same or other organisms. Evolutionarily speaking, it's easier to copy and modify something that already exists than to make it from scratch. We also have analogy evidence. Evolution also predicts similarity in function despite difference in structure, resulting from separate evolution of useful traits in species with distinct evolutionary histories. We see this in the octopus eye, which is structurally different from the human eye due to different ancestry. It turns out the human eye is actually worse, which I'll expand on later. We also see that in aquatic mammals, aquatic birds, and fish, they all have the ability to swim and live underwater, but they do so using different structures. These structures are also present in those ancestors, the ancestors that evolution predicts. You can also predict, on the other side of the coin, that no species of aquatic birds, aquatic birds or aquatic mammals would possess gills, despite the fact that they would be useful. And the reason for this is that these structures are not present in their ancestors, and again, we see no aquatic mammals or birds that possess gills. We also see that the design of most organisms does not appear intelligent. We have what we call suboptimality. And since structures evolve gradually, there is no back to the drawing board. Evolution predicts that many features of an organism will be suboptimal. That is, a structure with a more efficient design could fulfill the same function as well or better. We see an example of this in the mammalian GI tract, which crosses the respiratory system. This leads to our susceptibility to choking. It would be beneficial for us to be able to swallow and breathe at the same time. But unfortunately, our ancestor, the Devonian lungfish, had to swallow air in order to breathe. This is why we have our GI tract crossing our respiratory system. Evolution only had this pre-existing structure to work with when evolving our traits. Now we'll return to the idea of the eye. The mammalian eye possesses a blind spot on the retina where the optic nerves pierce the retina to go into the brain. Contrast this with the better constructed octopus eye, which has no blind spot since the optic nerves leave from behind the retina, not in front. Now, as an aside, the creationists here believe that humans were created very specially in God's image. Why would God create a suboptimal structure for his most beloved creation? To me, this seems illogical. Now, onwards. Suboptimality on the molecular level. Only 2% of our genome is actually used for making proteins. In fact, a single retrotransposon, one type of gene, composes 17% of our entire genome and does nothing. 20% of our genome is composed of pseudogenes, which are nearly identical to the other genes in our genome. Again, they serve no function whatsoever. Most of our genome is composed of short repeating sequences, which again do absolutely nothing. Why would we have all of this excess except as a remnant of our evolutionary history? Now, I think my time is running out.
2 minutes.
2 minutes? All right. I've barely scratched the surface of the mountain of evidence which supports evolution, and I'm going to implore you to seek out more for yourself. A simple Google Scholar search will turn up, I'll go as far as to say millions of articles which support evolution. Most of the scientific community stands on the side of evolution. It's not really a debate anymore. Hopefully, after hearing all of this, you'll agree that anyone who denies that evidence exists in support of the theory of evolution is either unfamiliar with the scientific method, ignorant of its findings, or just plain dishonest. Thank you.
All right, so now we'll have 5 minutes for rebuttal on behalf of the creationists.
Thanks, Keegan. Okay. So leading biologists themselves are now coming to the conclusion that macroevolution is not just microevolution, using their terminology, extended over time. In November 1980 conference, some of the world's leading evolutionary biologists, Biologist Historic, was held at the Chicago Field Museum of Natural History on the topic of macroevolution. Reporting on the conference in the journal Science, Roger Lewin wrote, "The central question of the Chicago conference was whether the mechanisms underlying microevolution can be extrapolated to explain the phenomenon of macroevolution. At the risk of doing violence to the positions of some of the people at the meeting, the answer can be as a given clear no." Francisca Alela, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, was quoted saying, "But I'm now convinced that from what the paleontologists say, that small changes do not accumulate. The fact is that this article reaches essentially the same conclusion in the following pages, can thus hardly cause it to be regarded as radical. Nevertheless, the vast majority of even well-educated people still persist in ignorance that it is. That is, they believe that big change is equal to small change over millions of years." Talked about a lot of stuff. So the pentadactyl limb patterns is most common. Similar forelimbs in a frog and reptile, horse and bat and human, like he mentioned, is consistent and is evidence also for a common designer. The same designer using the same basic pattern. I don't know how much, I'm gonna just leave it at there for that. With the genetic fossils or junk DNA, he mentioned the example with the vitamin C, and there was a study done, and I'll just try to tell you the story from, just to cut it down a bit. There was a study done with these South African, children who had very low vitamin C in their diet. But essentially what was found was that the levels of vitamin C were similar to well-nourished infants. It was also reported that ascorbic levels in the fetal brain could be 10 times higher than an adult human. The levels fell progressively with increasing of gestational age. So they did a study where they checked even the breastfed children had rising levels of vitamin C despite the decrease of ascorbic acid concentration in the milk. What does this show us? Humans can synthesize ascorbic acids in early stages of life as a result of an active pseudogene, which is clearly not a molecular fossil. And there's also another example of a junk DNA and olfactory receptor genes, which has to do with our odor, or with our smell. Regarding the chromosomal fusion that Keegan was talking about, Dr. Antonio Baldini reported that the presence of secondary alphoid DNA was not only present in chromosome 2, but also present in chromosome 9. Samanti, Ramesh, and Verma found that the majority of human probes did not hybridize to their corresponding equivalent ape chromosome, but gave positive signals to non-corresponding chromosomes. They concluded that these alphoid DNA sequences showed little conservation in primates. And there are also other examples of chromosomal fusion within individual species with regards to Indian muntjac and Chinese muntjac deer. How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? I think that's it. Thanks.
Okay, and now we'll have a 5-minute response from the evolutionists.
I think it was Kevin who started off the night quoting Stephen Jay Gould. Right. Stephen Jay Gould was a paleontologist. I just finished writing a report on his theory of punctuated equilibrium. Now, I haven't looked into it, but this may or may not be true regarding this discrepancy between macro and microevolution. But regardless, the fact that the experts are now iffy on it doesn't really speak with any weight, right? There's no logical reason why they shouldn't equilibrate, right? There's no reason that small-scale changes over time don't amount into large-scale changes. Just to say an example I just thought up, if you drop a drop of water in a bucket, over 10 days, you'll eventually fill up that bucket. Small-scale changes can and do amount to large-scale changes. I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that there were human cancer cells called HeLa cells, which are now known. They were taken out of a cancer patient named Henrietta Lacks, and so they were used in culture to study cancer. These cells are now a living, independent organism. They are effectively a laboratory weed. That, to me, amounts to pretty macroevolution. Something that used to be reliant on a host has now changed entirely in its morphology, its biochemistry, its genetics. Everything about that, everything that made that cell what it is, has changed. And to me, there is no reason that that is not another case in point of macroevolution scaling from microevolution. You mentioned, let's see, that homologous features were evidence for creation, right? Same design, right. So the reasoning, as I understand it, is that why wouldn't a creator use the same design for multiple uses, right? Well, that's sort of covered by the argument from analogy, which you didn't really address. That is, we see animals that perform the same function but use different structures. So why would an intelligent creator invent one structure for swimming in the water, but make up a new structure for swimming in the water for different organisms, but use the structure that he designed for swimming in the water to also grab things and like fly, and it doesn't make any logical sense. Now, I'm not claiming to know the mind of God, but it certainly doesn't seem logical by our standards, right? So the other thing that you talked about briefly, I think, was this vitamin C being created in African children or something. This is not really admissible as evidence because it's not a controlled experiment. And on top of that, I would see that actually as evidence of evolution because, hey, here's a gene that was once inactive and suddenly it's working again. That, to me, is evidence for evolution. On top of that, I can add another example. We're now seeing that there are children being born with resistance to AIDS. They have the disease because their mother had the disease, but they are immune to the effects. They see there is no symptoms whatsoever. This is, again, evolution of the human species. And so I believe that my points all still stand, and evolution is not only the key to our past, but it is the key to our future as well. Thank you.
All right, so now we have 5 minutes for questions. We have a very eager person in the back there, so let's let him go out.
Well, let me just start off by saying that this has been a great debate, and both sides, you've researched very well. Keegan, you spoke eloquently, and I appreciated the presentation of evolution. I thought your observations were great. I'll have to take your word on it for this transitional fossil thing. You said that there are many transitional fossils.
You've actually got the references.
Yeah, you'll have to send that to me because from what I've heard.
Here, you want the list?
I'll check that later. Oh, because I don't know that to be true. But
they're right here actually.
All right, I'll check that in a second.
Let us finish this question.
Well, let me ask my question because I'm not a debater here. My question is your evidences for evolution. Your practical evidences today for evolution followed an ostrich that can't fly, a fish that can't see, and vestigial organs that don't work anymore. So basically, things that don't work and are not needed anymore. You said that microevolution, which I would say is a misnomer. I would say it's more adaptation, an inherent trait given by God. So it's not microevolution, but you said that enough drops in a bucket will eventually fill that bucket. So enough microevolution will eventually produce macroevolution. But I think your examples were not drops in a bucket, but drops taken out of a bucket, right? And so enough drops taken out of a bucket are not going to produce macroevolution. It's going to produce nothing, right? Your evidences were something that can't fly, something that can't see, and so this is not evolution. This is not moving forward. This is moving in the opposite direction. This is moving towards extinction, not evolution.
All right, so let's see, the first thing. Yes, I discussed the ostrich wing, I discussed the blind salamander, but those were only two of my examples. I also discussed several other things. If you want an example of an increase in complexity, consider my example of the reptilian jawbone moving towards the inner ear bones. Also, this whole idea of moving towards extinction or moving towards complexity is fallacious and an a priori assumption at the start, because there is, in evolution, there is no good and bad. There is only what is beneficial in that environment. So there is no moving towards more complex. That does not necessarily mean that it's, getting better. It could be getting worse. What
I guess that's just because your first argument, abiogenesis, was a move from very simple to very complex. So at what point, because it does eventually have to go from simple to complex, so what environment is conducive? Because it seems to me that the environment today is actually pushing in the opposite direction, right? Is going from complex to simpler or complex to non-existent. So at what point did it go from simple to complex?
Right. Well, the reason that most people think we're seeing less complex, so to speak, is because there's actually a net destruction of ecological niches that's going on right now. At some point in our history, there was an abundance of very unique spaces where species would have the opportunity to adapt to those specific niches. I think you asked about increasing complexity, basically, right? You can check my original arguments about increase in genetic information, which then can be modified to increase the complexity of the genetic code. And once you increase the genetic code, you increase the different number of proteins, and once you do that, you get different and higher complexities, so to speak.
Okay, so do we have a question for the creationists? Anyone have a question for the creationists?
I can take another one if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Much similar to Graydon, thank you, Keegan. You presented a really well thought out argument. And Mackie, I just wanted to make reference to your earlier argument about how microevolution has been created and recreated in labs. I think you would agree with me that there's an impetus or a rationale behind this, the fact that we wanted to reproduce the effects of evolution, correct?
Well, what we did is we recreated the circumstances that were present then, and it happened on its own.
Okay, so given this, my question for you would be, what is the impetus for evolution? I feel that was failed to be addressed in the argument. You cited the example of the snake with no legs. Might I provide the example found in Genesis chapter 3 for your reference?
Can you...
Okay, since no one had a question for the creationists, do you guys mind if I ask you a question? Okay, so I just want to follow up on Keegan's point about suboptimality. So I'm just wondering if maybe one of the creationists could respond on this issue of, if we exhibit a design, if human beings exhibit a kind of intelligent design, why are we susceptible to diseases? Why are we susceptible to cancer? Why why do different strains of flus tend to adapt year after year to be more virulent and powerful in terms of their ability to make us sick if there's some sort of intelligent design or force or intelligence that is moving all of this along?
Yeah, I'm gonna address a lot of this stuff in my argument, but basically, actually, yeah, we'll leave it to that, to the argument, and to my closing remarks, we'll address your question.
Okay, so you are going to address it now in your second argument.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's let you get to it then.
Okay, so the argument that I'm going to be bringing tonight is that God created individual and genetically robust kinds, including mankind, with all the information necessary to produce the various species we see today. Building off the argument that Kevin so wonderfully delivered, I would like to take the next few minutes tonight to talk about the biblical concept of the created kinds. What do I mean when I say created kinds? The various original life forms kinds, including mankind that were made by direct creative acts of God. The living descendants of any of the original kinds apart from man may represent more than one species today, reflecting the genetic potential within the original kind. Only limited biological changes, including mutational deterioration, have occurred naturally within each kind since creation. So when looking at this definition, the question we ask is not what is a created kind? Is it a species, a family, or a genus? Rather, the question is which of today's populations are related to each other by this form of variation only within the created kind, and are in turn of that same created kind. Notice that this is vastly removed from the evolutionist notion of common descent, because as the creationist looks back in time along a line of descent, he sees an expansion of the gene pool, but as the evolutionist does likewise, he sees a contraction. This is the main thrust I'll be expanding on tonight. This controversial concept, based on the evidence that the gene pool or amount of genetic information is not expanding over time as evolution would teach, but it is contracting over time, which is consistent with the Genesis account in the Bible. Really, what type of change is being witnessed as we observe natural selection and variation? What is natural selection? Natural selection, as defined by evolution, is the process by which heritable traits that increase an organism's chances of survival and reproduction are favored over less beneficial traits. The process that results in the evolution of an organism. So in other words, natural selection as a result of mutation is claimed to be the mechanism through which genetic information must be added. The significance of the concept is that the type of change we're looking at stands in stark contradiction to the evolutionary account and supports the biblical account of the created kinds. As it has been appropriately stated, it is not that the train has had insufficient time to go far enough, the train is going in the wrong direction. Natural selection is the process through which we observe variation within kinds. The problem with natural selection as evolution defines it, is that it in fact does not lead to an increase of genetic information, it leads to a loss. And this information being quantified through what Kevin has already explained and defined in his argument, which specifies living things. This can be seen within variation of any kind. There's not necessarily less DNA or less genes witnessed within a kind, but there's less variety of those genes. For example, and this will be simplified, we take wolves. Let's say two medium-length furred wolves code genes for short fur, long fur, and medium fur. They do their thing to result in offspring with short fur, medium fur, and long fur. If you kill off or remove all the offspring but the short-furred canines and mate them, you will only get offspring with short fur. The ability to code for long fur has been lost. You're getting a reduction in the variety of genes available. That's why dogs are purebred. There's less variety. As generations pass, there are more desirable traits seen, but you also see more problems, more disease. This is why you wouldn't marry your cousins, because your genes are too closely related. You're not getting more information, you're decreasing information through this selecting. Now, does this mean that a species can't change? No, it doesn't. A species is defined as an individual belonging to a group of organisms, or the entire group itself, having common characteristics and are capable of mating with one another. When you witness natural selection within the created kind, new species are observed. For example, speciation could occur between the zebra, horse, and donkey, which may be the offspring of one created kind. As a creationist, I agree with that, though a Darwinian explanation is not the only one to be heard. It is just as viable to state that the original kind, the ancestor of the zebra, horse, and donkey, was created with genes for the variety witnessed in these species. This gives rise to more specialized descendants. The specialization witnessed shows actually that each has lost information for certain traits. The formation of a new species, as evolutionists will define it as no problem for myself, or should it be for any other biblical creationist, because no information gain is observed. Speciation does not follow the demands of evolution, rather it follows the dictates of biblical creation. The exciting thing in all this is that when a new species is observed forming in nature along these lines, it happens astonishingly fast. That plays a major factor because when you compare the 6,000-year biblical timeline to the 4.54 billion year evolutionist timeline, 6,000 years is astonishingly fast. If we can witness this speciation so quickly, it does support the statement that variation seen today from original kinds has occurred over a much shorter time than evolution teaches. God designed the original kinds with a large amount of genetic information that is decreased through time via natural selection, leading to the species that we have today. Now, natural selection is not on its own the only player when it comes to variation information. We have what I mentioned earlier, which are mutations. Mutations are basically chance genetic copying mistakes in the DNA. They're inherited defects. We all exhibit hundreds of these mutations, but most are neutral and meaningless. However, many give us serious inherited diseases. These mutations are also a lost corruption of information. Neo-Darwinian theory demands that out of all of these mutations, and they're happening all the time all over the world, hundreds if not thousands of them should be information adding. Israeli biophysicist Dr. Lee Spetner says, all point mutations that have been studied on a molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it. Yes, change does happen, but this change is in a downhill direction. Even if there were a handful of mutations that increase information, that would not be enough. But we have no known case of added information. What we see in living things is consistent with what we would expect from the Bible, which is that in the beginning, groups, different populations were created carrying a more robust amount of information essential to allow them to survive, adapt, multiply, and fill the earth. Now, allow me to illustrate what I'm talking about so I'm not vague or ambiguous. You have two basic categories of mutations. It is possible for mutations to occur where there is a change in DNA without a change in the protein. To put simply, we have been designed with DNA repair mechanisms and also compensation mechanisms, which mean that even though there is a change in DNA, that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a change in the protein. The other type of mutation involves a change in DNA with a change in protein. These mutations often result in cancer, but they also result in what many would claim to be a beneficial functional mutation which evolution can hang its hat on. What about these beneficial mutations? Well, there are mutations that occur that yield beneficial outcomes in a given environment. Antibiotic resistance, for one, has already been brought up, and I'm going to expand on that so you can understand what's actually going on. We'll look at antibiotic resistance in the case of Helicobacter pylori, which are the bacteria responsible for causing most ulcers. Now, what happens as, I'll just refer to it as HP, what happens as HP is introduced to antibiotics. When antibiotics are taken, they are absorbed through the cell wall of the bacteria. HP produces an enzyme that ends up converting the antibiotic into a poison, which is the desired effect because it kills the bacteria. But the bacteria becomes resistant. They get information from other microorganisms, and now they mutate and they become antibiotic resistant. The mutation causes HP to no longer produce the enzyme that the antibiotic reacts with at all. They survive because of less genetic information, not more, and they no longer produce this enzyme. Now, what happens if the normal bacteria and the mutant bacteria are placed together without the antibiotic? As they compete for survival, the normal bacteria will win. Why? Because the enzyme that is no longer produced by HP is a protein that allows the bacteria to break down nutrients. So yes, the mutation is beneficial in a given environment, but a price is paid due to the loss of genetic information, and the normal bacteria can compete better. Bacteria can also mutate and become antibiotic resistant through spontaneous mutation. This is not new genetic information. In all these cases, it is merely a shuffling or an exchange of information that is already present, which, though leading to a beneficial mutation in one environment, leads to loss of information and original function. What can appear to be a dramatic example of change with the appearance of apparently new traits thus turns out, when its genetic basis is understood, to be an overall downward movement in informational terms. The number of sentences carried by each subgroup is reduced, thus making it less likely to survive future environmental changes. Extrapolating that sort of process forward in time does not lead to upwards evolution, but ultimately to extinction, with the appearance of ever more informationally depleted populations. As Dr. Royal Truman states, time becomes the greatest enemy of evolution. As I would put forward tonight, time becomes the greatest ally of biblical creation. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll have our evolutionist rebut for 5 minutes.
All right. Where to begin? So actually, just to bring the creationism thing back, there's really no mention of genetically robust kinds in the Bible or of any kind of genetics in the Bible. And second of all, I'd like to see the evidence of anything that, like, I will accept the HP example, but that's only a single example, and I would say, well, yes, I guess it is losing genetic material, but it is advantageous. Yes, that would be one example of evolution where DNA is lost, but that means nothing in comparison to the massive amounts of evidence to the contrary. What else do we have here? We have, if you have a progenitor species of all the finches on Galapagos Island, why is there not fossil evidence of this progenitor? How come we see the gradual and sometimes not gradual, which I will explain later, transition from one form to another? I don't understand how you can. There's so many different states of, even as Keegan said, the jaw going to the inner ear. I don't understand how that could be just from one progenitor, and then that's how it is. So I don't think there's any progenitor in fossils, and there's lots of examples of mutation where it adds DNA to allow for better evolution, such as bacteria obtaining genetic information to digest nylon, as well as, I just wrote this down, which is colonial theory, which is it's the theory of multicellularity, which is where simple one-celled organisms, single-celled organisms came together to create a multi-celled organism. That's going from decreasing complexity to increasing complexity as a positive result. Punctuated equilibrium explains fast speciation. I don't know if I have time to get into it, but oh, really? 4 minutes? Nice. So punctuated equilibrium is the theory that which is kind of contrasted with phyletic gradualism, which is what most people would consider to be Darwinism, which is the slow change from one form to another. We have punctuated equilibrium, which is when you have a population and you have almost like a normal curve, where you have most of the forms of that species in a certain area. But you have two extreme outliers on each end. If you geographically or somehow separate the two outliers from each other, those will be quite different from each other, and therefore you'll see almost as a jump from in the fossil records, because you'll see a certain form, and then in another region you'll see that this similar animal is actually quite different. And I think that that would explain fast speciation. What else do I have here? I have Nathan, you kind of talked about how genetic information, loss of genetic information results in extinction. Is that right? Yeah. That's not true, because you can't whittle away a genome until an animal suddenly says, "Oh, I can't make a brain," and then dies. Like, I don't understand where you get that from. Extinction happens from loss of habitat, or what some people would evolutionists would believe. What killed the dinosaurs would be a giant meteorite or meteor, whatever, that killed them all off suddenly. There's no whittling away until you're nothing, or I don't even understand how that works. There's so much evidence for evolution. I just can't understand why you would attempt to argue the smallest things that we would say, yeah, HP, yes, loss of genetic information. In this one case, that would for sure be a loss of genetic information for to be beneficial, but we have lots of other cases that is the opposite. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, I have one thing, which is, I don't know if anyone here's, how much time? 1 minute. Okay. I don't know if anyone's familiar with homeotic genes, which are genes that encode for what each segment of a body will become. If you mess around with the Hox genes of a whale, you will get atavastic, meaning primitive. So before the whale species emerged to what it is now, you'll get legs, and we have evidence here that you'll get legs, and that's an increase of genetic information to further to delete the legs and have the vestigial organs. I guess that's all I have to say.
All right, so we have 5 minutes now for a response.
Okay, thanks, Roman. I just first want to say, obviously, we don't have time to look into a vast amount of cases that we're pointing at regarding a loss of genetic information. I think that's obvious. Talking about one specific example in the Helicobacter pylori. That's all we had time to do. And the question you asked about, can this be a progenitor? That's a straw man. I didn't claim that these original kinds were a progenitor. The concept of kind does not fit into a Darwinian idea of a tree of life, right?
I meant the original kind that God would have created would be the progenitor for the horses, donkeys, zebras.
Yeah, okay. But you're redefining that in terms of what you understand in terms of what Darwin evolution teaches. So the concept of kinds, as I tried to define it out in the argument, is that all this variation that we do see within these species can come from the original kind because of a decrease in information. This thought of single cell to multi-cell, there is no increase in information again in this idea. This information already exists, it's just grouping. It's the same with the microorganism exchange of information in the HP. Loss of information going to extinction. I didn't say that if information is lost, you're just going to die on the spot. Talking about this concept of time and things happening over time, these mutations are not good things. And over time, you're extrapolating this over time, it does lead to death, it would lead to extinction. And also talking about this idea of the smallest things, or this little example, that is what microevolution is. If you start looking into evolution, a vast amount of their studies are on these bacteria, these little tiny changes that are saying, yes, this is microevolution, this is yielding big changes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that went fairly quickly, so we have a fair bit of time now to open it up to questions. So yeah, in the back, come on up.
Question I have is for the evolutionists. Both of these things that we've been talking about tonight require, for lack of a better term, a stage. The physical universe really is the stage for this. The Earth, I think, is it Mackie on the end here? Yeah, you mentioned it in the beginning, the assumption of gases, atoms, elements that make up life. I know what creation says about the physical universe, how it came into existence. And I sincerely would like to know what you guys believe about how the physical universe came into existence.
Well, I mean, I'd like to answer your question, but it's not really relevant to the situation. I know it makes sense that you need the stage. I can show you.
So you don't have an answer to that question?
Wait, let me get to it. Sorry?
Do it. Okay, so we didn't research this as much, but there is evidence that the universe, I know this is going to sound very strange, but has come from nothing, because we have detected that that protons will spontaneously come into existence and come out of existence quite rapidly. And it is that's just using emergent properties of that, you can have the results of the Big Bang. Keegan can add to this.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple things. Okay. So like Roman was saying, we've shown that protons can spontaneously, that is, without any cause, pop in and out of existence. Now, if you think of a universe that does not exist, then if a proton spontaneously pops into existence, suddenly you have something. This is the core of where the Big Bang comes from, and shows how you can get something from nothing, which is, again, shown in evolution, getting very complex structures from nothing. I'll refer you to read up on some work of Lawrence Krauss or Stephen Hawking to better answer your questions.
So you basically believe Hebrews 11, 1-3.
I'm not familiar with the biblical quote.
You should read it, because what you just said is Hebrews 11,
You're going to have to tell me.
Well, you read it for yourself. Now, so...
Hebrews...
What?
Sorry, what was it?
Hebrews 11, verses 1-3.
It says that protons spontaneously pop into existence and cause...
No, that
what is it?
What is...
Then that's not what I was saying.
No. What you're saying is that it just basically happened all on its own, magically.
Or
scientifically, magically.
Not magically,
came
naturally.
into existence.
Naturally.
It just happened.
Yes.
And there was no cause for that.
Yes.
Not that we know of.
No cause. You have proof for that.
I refer you to Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking for proof.
And that's your proof.
I don't have the proof.
Okay.
Refer to Stephen Hawking and Lawrence Krauss.
So you really don't have an answer to that question.
I am not a physicist, and this is not a debate on the where the universe came from. This is a debate on where life on Earth came from.
But this is the whole basis, right? Without a physical universe, you've got no life.
Okay, let's move on to another question. I think we've worked that one over enough. So does anyone have a question for the creationists? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Hello? Never in history has a supernatural explanation been more accurate than a natural explanation. Humans thought sickness was caused by demons and witches, but then you have a natural explanation, the germ theory of disease, which led to modern medicine. Is it Thor that throws lightning, or is it electrons? My question to you is, if you say evolutionists and creationists are looking at the same evidence but interpreting it differently, why should we take the supernatural explanation over the natural explanation?
And that's a hugely relevant question. Entirely, that's basically the implications of everything that we're talking about tonight. And I will be mentioning that in the closing remarks, but that's what this comes down to, your question of why should we take this supernatural explanation over a natural explanation does entirely come down to you as an individual. It entirely comes down to you as a person looking at everything that has been put forward and saying, based on this evidence and based on my experience, what do I believe and why do I believe it? I think that is your personal endeavor as you are hearing what we're saying, as you're hearing what these guys are saying, as you're talking with your friends, you're sitting in your classroom. This is the decision that you'll make. I can tell you why you should take the supernatural explanation, and I'll define that as I close tonight.
So hard, So this is a question for the evolutionists. And in your second argument, you were comparing the similarities between primates and humans. And one of the main similarities that you pulled out was the fact that the primates had 24 chromosomes, the humans had 23, and the similarities that they that when you have the two chromosomes come together, they create the human's chromosome, right? My question to you is, what is the difference between apes and humans that allows us to think of clothing, to come up with intelligence? We are sitting here and we're having a debate about whether we believe evolution or creation? Do you see any other animals in the entire animal kingdom having that similar debate? Do you have any kind of intelligence creating, all these structures that are around us? Do you have tools? Now, I understand that, you have apes that have tools to dig into termite hives and et cetera to get the food, but do they actually use it to create something like this, a building like this, where they can take shelter and et cetera? Personally, I don't understand. I don't understand how you can believe, in an evolutionist point of view, where everything is evolving towards one direction, but you have such a vast difference between humans and the entire rest of the animal kingdom. Thank you.
So first of all, evolution is not moving in one direction. Evolution is running in the direction that's best suited for the species to survive. Part of my answer to that would be, what's wrong with humans to be the first species to have developed this? Evolution hasn't stopped, and it will not stop. So I don't see a problem with human beings being the first sentient life on Earth.
Yeah, I'll just build on that a little bit. This essentially comes down to the anthropic principle, I believe it's called. We were, as Roman said, the first animals on the planet to achieve this consciousness, this higher sentience, logical reasoning, whatever. And obviously, if there were other organisms that had achieved such intelligence, then you wouldn't be asking that question, right? So the very fact that you ask that question sort of answers itself. What else was there? Okay, just distinguishing the distinguishing features between apes and humans. We don't really see that many differences. In fact, you've got basic language evolving in apes. Like the jump from apes to humans is not a big one. And jumping into a little bit of evolutionary history here, they think that the reason that humans evolved such more complex brains was for hunting purposes, so that we had to outsmart other animals, and so we needed to have a better frontal lobe to plan better, and that's why we were able to, set traps and hunt animals. That is the reason for us evolving more intelligence. Did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say that there were way more similarities between humans and great apes than there are differences.
Thank you.
All right, so do we have any questions out there for creationists? Questions for creationists? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Hello. So you guys said that small-scale changes to our DNA are causing our extinction, or will lead to our extinction. Is that what you said? So then why can't it move the other way? Because you said that microevolution, it can't lead to big changes. But on the other hand, you're saying that small changes can lead to a large change in our extinction. So what's the difference?
Basically, and this is what I defined in the argument as, we're looking at these small changes, that you're looking at these mutations really which lead to natural selection. It is a degradation, it is a downhill move. So the very nature of these changes dictate what direction they're going in. So it's that same, that quote that I shared, it's not that the train hasn't had long enough to get there, it's going in the opposite direction. So based on what I presented and based on what I've looked at, the reason why that can't happen is because these changes are resulting in a loss of information, a loss of diversity, really, genetic diversity.
All right, we still have time. We still have time for probably a couple more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for letting me ask another. Earlier, I mentioned two things. One was the eye and brain. We talked about the instructor and decoder. You said you mentioned that later. You didn't explain how the genetic mutation needs to be simultaneous on both, as we agree that each of its own would be of no advantage. The other point I asked earlier was that of conscience. I think you made reference to 6 levels of consciousness. While we recognize that we have self-awareness, we must also recognize, however, that we have a soul that contains, amongst other things, love and hate, that does evil and does good. You each self-taught yourself, you each self-taught or self-learned to lie and steal as a child, for example, whether it's stealing cookies or what have you. Your conscience told you that this was wrong. You also stress over many learned issues in your lives. The reality of self-awareness and the stress it causes would in fact be medically detrimental to evolution, as stress causes many health issues, and I'd suggest that everyone's life here would probably be a lot easier if stress were not a factor. Each person here, however, does deal with stress in their conscience, and they deal with sin in their lives. What part of evolution supports these realities as an evolutionary advancement?
All right, well, what we have here is generally talking about the moral objectivism, right? Like you're saying that there's a moral absolute and therefore a soul somehow. I'm not sure how that follows. We have great explanations for feelings of sadness and love, and that's why we can observe these feelings in a brain. We can see certain parts of the brain activate, and we have actually seen cases where people's brains get damaged and they can no longer feel love or sadness. It's all mechanical. It's just your brain. And about morality, well, how to act in a group. We have stress because we overuse ourselves. We didn't evolve for this situation. We may be adapting to it now, but we evolved for things like trees and hunting, you know, that stuff. But morally, to act in a group, to act as a group, which is one of our greatest features. We work as a team. We have language. We speak to each other. You have to come up with, or evolution has to facilitate these sort of things. They make changes in the brain that make you want to do good. They've seen elephants that have gone out of their way to give their lives to save another elephant. Do they have a soul? Do elephants have a soul? I've seen dogs take other dogs off of a street, putting their own life in danger. That's altruism. If that's not morality, I don't know what is. You want that?
If you could come back up and clarify, I want to answer your question about the eye. I'm not sure I quite understand what you're asking, so if you could.
Sure. Sorry. We've got we've got two parts. We've got the eye giving information. So you've evolved, if you would, to have this thing called an eye that receives information. It then has to send it somewhere for processing. So part of the brain then also has to evolve at the same time so that it can then process the information that's received. And it seems to me that while this whole thing is going on, you've got two genetic mutations happening at the same time. And while that energy is being used by whatever that organism is, it puts it at a definite disadvantage in its existing environment against other organisms that don't have those singular genetic deficiencies.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, first off, to address this energy problem, that is not a significant disadvantage. It's probably not enough of a selection pressure for that to actually be selected against. Regarding the eye evolving at the same time as the brain, that's what we call co-evolution. It's another documented example of evolution where they don't evolve. They do indeed evolve at the same time. And if you need examples, look at just basic flatworms that have not a fully formed brain that can process the images. All right, a euglena, a unicellular organism, right? Yeah. Okay.
So another part of this question is, where do you see the eye first coming onto the scene? Because it seems to me that you're starting from, you say, well, this is an eye and a brain, but you are already halfway into the development of the eye and brain. See, there's a single-celled organism called a euglena, and it has what is known as an eye spot or an ocelli. Yeah. So all it is on, off, light, no light. That's all it does. And that's what most of all eyes up until eyes that can form images do. But all it says is you're in light, you're not in light. And then it allows the euglena to travel in the direction. And since it's a photosynthesizing organism, it likes to be in the light. So whenever whenever it's not in light, it will seek for light and seek to stay in the light. with planaria, which are flatworms, they have a similar function, except they are for the darkness. Yes, and I would say that this is kind of this is just my thoughts, my conjecture, but I would say that the evolution of the brain with respect to the eye is for increased directionality, so that you can help coordinate the eye, brain, and movement of the organism to what is beneficial for that organism.
Okay, I think we have to quit there. Yeah. Well, what do you guys think? Do you mind going?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I would just like to point out that what you have just heard is an argument based on need. It is not an argument based on scientific evidence of how this is going to happen at the same time. What they are arguing is that, okay, you need both the eye and the receptor at the same time, so therefore they will evolve at the same time. That is not scientific. Just because you need something doesn't mean it's going to happen. Evolution is based on the premise that just because something is needed, it doesn't mean it will happen. Evolution says it's random chance, random mutation, so therefore whatever helps will be selected for, but it doesn't say that whatever is needed will be produced, because evolution is blind. It is not with a goal in mind. It's not goal-oriented. So this is an argument based on need, and that is not an argument. That is just saying, well, we needed it, so we evolved it. And
that's not what we were saying. Sorry.
Okay. Well, can you clarify, please?
What did we say that gave you that impression exactly?
Well, that's what I heard. But just, if you'd like to clarify, go ahead.
Okay. Basically, what we're saying is. Kevin's absolutely correct. You don't get evolution due to need. You get evolution because, say, for example, this euglena evolved, and since it photosynthesizes, suddenly it evolves spontaneously an eye spot, which can somehow signal whether it's in light or darkness. Now, since it can do that, that trait is selected for. It's only selected for because it is beneficial, and that is why the eye was favored. As I said before, we see the eye evolving many, many different times. How many? 27 different times. Independently, a optic organ has evolved, if essentially the eye has evolved. So it shows that this is a very beneficial trait to have, to be able to see things, and that is what we would call convergent evolution. Anyway,
yeah, thanks for specifying, Keegan. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So we should move now on to closing statements. Okay, so the evolutionists are up first.
Kevin started this evening by saying that scientists have an a priori argument, an a priori disposition, so to speak. I would say that the same thing applies to creationists. The a priori for all these creationists, and for most of you in the room, I'm sure the reason you believe in creation is because the Bible says so. Your a priori assumption is that the Bible is true. Now, as my friend Mackie Drew likes to say, you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. So you can try to interpret this evidence in the way you want to, but eventually the truth will out. Now, tonight you've heard arguments from both sides of this issue, so how do you decide where you stand? Well, forgive me if I'm slightly offensive, but if you want a comforting tale of magic and an all-powerful father figure who made this entire endless universe just for you, then stick with creation, but know that you're deluding yourself. If, on the other hand, you're concerned with hard facts, evidence, and good science, evolution is the way to go. Creationism is the definition of bad science because it drew its conclusion before it had any facts to support it, and since then, its proponents have twisted the facts of the natural world to try and force reality to bend to their will. One of my favorite quotes from the new Sherlock Holmes movie is, "If you draw your conclusion first, you begin to twist facts to fit theories instead of theories to fit facts." Now, science and religion can coexist, but only if religion stops making claims on the natural world. The natural world is the domain of science and inquiry, not a place for superstition and the supernatural. You live your life in the natural world. You look both ways before you cross the street. You believe that causes in this world have natural effects, so why make any exceptions for the origin of life? You should assume a natural cause and look for the evidence. There is no reason to go directly to a supernatural cause. Tonight we've provided a coherent, logical, natural explanation for the occurrence and development of life on Earth, which is supported by observation and experimentation in the real world. Creationism cannot make predictions because that would involve understanding the mind of God. And therefore, creationism is not a true theory and not a scientific theory, because a scientific theory must accurately make predictions. The entire arguments from the creationist side, I believe, have been a non sequitur. They may have proved that there is some intelligent designer, but they have not said that it's their God. Now, I know I asked you to keep the Bible out of it, but I meant this only for an evidential point of view. Perhaps that was miscommunication. But in any case, tonight the creationists here have made a case for intelligent design. This is not provide any proof for the creation by Yahweh, the God of the Judeo-Christian religion. Furthermore, the creationists tonight have not successfully refuted our points. I've told you cases of added mutations, mutations that add complexity and information to genomes. I think that the creationists probably did a Google search on, creationism proof bacterial microevolution, something like that, because they brought up the single example that we call Pratt, which is what...
previously refuted 1,000 times.
Previously refuted 1,000 times. H. pylori is the single example of a bacteria that loses genetic information to get a benefit from it. An example that I can't give the specifics of is you get sometimes mutations that physically break the antibiotic. That is a gain in function due to mutation. Again, genetically robust kinds, Genesis says the created kinds, but nowhere does it say anything about genetically robust kinds that already contained all the information to show all this. There's no evidence for this in the scientific literature. None of this has been proven. This is all conjecture. There's no evidence for this, so why should you or anyone else believe it? Getting, again, another example of this increase in genetic information. These HeLa cells that I spoke of earlier actually gained genetic information and function. How else do you explain how they went from being dependent on the host, the human host, they went from that to being entirely self-sufficient? And as for this tiny change in DNA not being able to affect a large change, how would you explain what if, a gene that encoded a hormone such as estrogen was mutated and suddenly you get progesterone instead? You get an entirely different hormone. The overall morphology of the organism would be entirely changed. That is an enormous change that would result from a single point mutation. Now, a minute left, okay. Evolution is the pinnacle of modern science and the unifying theory of biology because it is a delicate and falsifiable claim which makes accurate predictions and explains all observed phenomena. Creation does neither of those things. Creationists believe that they can see farther from the ground than scientists can standing on the shoulders of giants. Thank you.
All right, and we'll have our closing statement now from the creationists.
Okay. Just to quickly respond to some of the stuff Keegan said. When you're talking about this information, I would encourage you all to think back to Kevin's argument. He laid out very definitively how we're defining biological information. And we can put forth these papers that we have and the evidence that we have for that if you're curious about that. But basically, I want to talk tonight about coming back to this basic question that I hope and I trust you've all been asking yourselves tonight. How can we look at the same evidence and come to such different conclusions? Or as my friend here said, why would I believe one thing over the other? For all the evidence, for all the arguments, for all the data, is there truly something deeper at work here? I would put forth that yes, there is. As Kant rightly stated, everything that reaches consciousness is utterly and completely adjusted, simplified, schematized, and interpreted. Your worldview is how you look at the world around you, the set of basic assumptions that help you make sense of reality, the grid that frames the nature of reality for your life. You may only be aware of what you see, not the lens. Our hope is that you've stepped back tonight to look at that lens and see if it holds up. The fact that the scientific approach is objective, open-minded, unbiased, and possessing an all-powerful and infallible method to ascertain the truth is a distorted image, and that is a thought we all must entertain. I don't agree with the assumption of our friends that there will eventually be an exhaustive, reductionist, naturalistic explanation of everything in scientific terms. If God does exist, the God of the Bible, and if He created all things, and if He is personal, then it would be expected for certain things to follow. That we would see evidence, not proof, but evidence in the universe that God exists. The notion that science can explain everything is a vitally flawed notion. Science cannot and will not be able to deal with the simplest questions of a child, the questions many of you ponder when something forces you to think deep. Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? Is this reality only random nothingness with ultimately no purpose? Science cannot deal with art, with poetry, with history, with beauty, with emotion. As John Lennox rightly says, science is limited, and that's no insult to science. As we look through history at science and how it has been interpreted, taught, and accepted, there have only been two constants: belief in a divine creator, or belief that there cannot and must not be a divine creator. Every argument has changed. Everything else has changed. So it is by no means out of place to bring this back to the fundamental question of faith. Now, I'm not a fan of the slogan that seems to float around that it takes more faith to believe in evolution as a way to try and trap somebody in a discussion. But as I reflect on reality, I assert that we cannot deny this aspect of bias, as we have heard, an a priori adherence to naturalism or supernaturalism. We are in no way claiming that evolutionary science is bad science. It's not. Great research is done in the name of evolution, but we are pointing you to the fact that its inferences are not reality. As we've explained tonight through the concept and theory of biological information, its origin and its application witnessed through mutations and subsequent natural selection, we have put forth compelling evidence that points to creation as we see it in the biblical account, that God created living things according to their kinds, which is a reference to the scripture of the Holy Bible. When we look at the world around us, we witness disease, decay, degradation, and violence, all of this consistent with the Genesis curse. The reason why Christ came, believing and teaching the literal Genesis seen in the Bible, the Creator God made flesh, and the only name under heaven by which people must be saved, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you've done. God wants us to see the world the way He's told us it is, that everything begins with the infinite personal God, and the whole universe, the world, and human life, whether it's science, law, politics, anthropology, sociology, economics, or history, is understood through that lens because He's good. Ladies and gentlemen, please think deeply about these issues and their implications and ask yourselves these deep questions. We cannot and must not stand for ignorance. There is a way to go about thinking. We must promote and pursue wise thinking as it pertains to evidence and experience. We can stand on the truth of the Word of God in this pursuit. There is more than what is seen, and I hope that you've caught a glimpse of that tonight. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's thank all of our participants for an informative and spirited debate. And thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. Unfortunately, that brings an end to our this debate this evening. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you.